Okay, good afternoon, students. We are in week 6 and we are going over cultural identity. So let's give it a start. Here we go. I will stop along the way to get some questions and comments. So thanks for showing up today. Hey there, students. I hope you're ready to move on to the next exciting part of identity. Today we will be exploring cultural identity as identity with respect to it belonging to specific groups. It's part of a person's self-concept and self-perception, of course, and it relates to nationality, ethnicity, religion, social class, certain generations. You know, we've talked about we're living where there's 5 different generations, as well as geographically, locally, and within groups. They all have a way of defining specific culture. Next, we're going to take a look at a culture's identity as it's represented through symbols and symbolically. Some of these symbols represent patterns, values, language, architecture, pastimes, art, relational roles, societal systems, and behaviors. Within some of these symbols, they have a way of introducing themselves to us that are from various countries throughout the world, also known as taboos. Things that are a little uncommon to some of us. Let's take a look at this short video clip to get a better understanding. Here we go.
The word taboo originates from a mealtime in 1777 when British explorer James Cook invited a Tongan tribe to sit down with him and enjoy the food. The tribe refused, telling Cook it was taboo for them to do so. Startled Cook, probably feeling a little taken aback, asked what taboo meant, and after a little time with some help from the tribesmen, he found out it meant something that was forbidden, inviolable, or even cursed. Today we all live with our own cultural taboos. For example, the average American is not likely to make a steak out of his dearly departed grandmother, but for the Korowai tribe in Western New Guinea, consuming the carcass of the deceased is not a social faux pas. It's a right. Today we are going to explore our cultural differences in this episode of the infographic show, Taboos Around the World. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell button so that you can be part of our notification squad. Let's start by traveling to the USA and looking at a controversial taboo that persists today. Having an intimate relationship with our own family member is seen as an immutable no-no in just about every culture, not only because we deem it unethical, but also because the offspring of such a relationship is at risk of being genetically flawed. In the USA, one famous incestuous relationship happened quite recently, and that was with the Mamas and the Papas band leader, John Phillips. He started having an intimate relationship with his own daughter, Mackenzie. This was quite a shock when the story came out in 2009, especially as his daughter told the press she had aborted his baby. In most US states, that would be a crime punishable with a prison sentence, although in New Jersey, an incestuous relationship is legal. Marriage for the couple is not. Speaking of genetic flaws, the author of On the Origin of Species, Charles Darwin, married his first cousin. They had 10 kids together and 3 of them died very young. In the UK, incest is illegal, but only for close family. What Darwin did then would be legal today in the UK. Staying in America for a moment, we know that when the index finger is pointed at someone, it is almost universally seen as rude, and that's probably due to the export of Hollywood films. Outside of the USA, it's more complex. In Asia, holding up the forefinger and index finger with the palm turned inwards is seen as a sign of cuteness, but in the UK, it's liable to get you into a fight. This is because it was the sign English archers of the past showed to their French rivals to prove they still had 2 fingers. The French would cut them off if they captured the archers, so they couldn't use them again to pull the string on the archer's bow. The sign now in the UK is the equivalent of giving the middle finger in the US. In most parts of Asia, don't point at anyone as it's seen as impolite, while a thumb up gesture in Israel, where hitching rides is common, is offensive. It's the same throughout much of the Middle East. Imagine giving the finger to every car that passes you. Let's now look more at Asia, where taboos are perhaps more prevalent. In some parts of Asia, pointing at the soles of your feet at someone is seen as extreme rudeness and could easily easily get you into trouble. This is also true in Russia as well as parts of the Middle East. That's why when George W. Bush almost took a shoe to the head from an angry Iraqi journalist, it was more symbolic than it was an act of violence. The shoe was a dirty weapon aimed at the highest and most esteemed point of the body. In countries such as Thailand and China, putting your feet up on a chair, and certainly any place near to where someone might put their head, is seen as very disrespectful. The foot in most of Asia is viewed as dirty, and the head is seen as sacred. If you are planning to travel to Asia, bear this in mind, lest you rankle the locals. Okay, so the rude American may have upset his Asian host with his filthy big feet, but what about the noise that guy makes when he eats? Most cultures accept that eating quietly with your mouth closed is just plain good etiquette if you are older than 3 years old. Not so much in China, where eating at a restaurant can sound like a chorus of cows chomping down on wet grass. Well, to the Chinese, the sound emitting from your mouth is a sign of how much you appreciate the food. It's like saying, "That's delicious," without the words. The Chinese slurp and the Filipinos often smack their lips. If it bothers you, just remember someone is having a good time. In Asia, how you eat, what you wear, your body language, and even how you write has to be taken into consideration. In parts of Asia, be careful when you write something down for someone, as writing in red ink is seen as a curse. This is because in some Asian cultures, red ink was reserved for messages applying to the deceased. Filling in an official form in red, maybe even an arrival card, in countries such as Taiwan, Korea, Japan, or Thailand, is seen as bad form and perhaps a very bad omen. Red is reserved for the dead in an official environment. As for what you eat, some Asians chow down on animals that are strictly taboo foods in the West. While cannibalism is downright taboo pretty much everywhere in the world, there are certain animals cultures put on the table that cause outcries in the Western media. The most infamous is the consumption of dog meat, something it's thought around 5 to 30% of South Koreans have done. According to one BBC story, a bowl of dog soup will set you back about $10 in South Korea. Dog is also eaten in China, Vietnam, Nigeria, and Indonesia. In 2014, Newsweek reported hundreds of thousands of people in Switzerland eat cat and dog meat, adding that it's a specialty dish at Christmas. The French have a penchant for cooked horse, the Thais have been known to eat chicken embryos on a stick, and deep-fried guinea pig as a specialty has moved from South America and is now eaten in the USA. For around $45, you can try some at the Yurubamba restaurant in New York. If cute rodent isn't your thing, the restaurant also offers veal heart, cow foot stew, and rabbit. Taboos don't only relate to what you eat, but how you eat. In many Western countries, it's polite to clean your plate of food, even if you are not so keen on the cuisine. Leaving food might mean you didn't like it, and it's also seen as being wasteful. Well, if you do that in China, India, or Afghanistan, one thing is going to happen. Your plate will be refilled. It's seen as polite to always leave a little, and a bit greedy or expectant to clean your plate, as it's saying, "Give me more." This has certainly led to situations in which polite Westerners have made themselves almost sick by politely eating up what's offered, only for their guests to think they are absolute gluttons but obliged to fill the plate again. Do some taboos carry across every culture? Insulting someone's mother or father is taboo pretty much worldwide for obvious reasons, but in some cultures even mentioning parents in a negative light can get you into trouble or even killed. In Russia, a curse with a parent in it is seen as the worst thing you could possibly say. In Madagascar, children belonging to the Antandari tribe are not even allowed to call their father by his name. In some Hindu families, even the wives of husbands are not permitted to call the man by his name, although progressive Hindus see this as antiquated and patriarchal. Some Westerners may find that strange, but in most Western countries it's taboo for children to be on first name terms with their parents. The curse mother plus expletive is almost universal in language. Surely public pooping is universally taboo? In developed nations, yes, but the BBC reported in 2015 that open defecation in India was still a problem mostly due to the lack of toilets. French philosopher Michel de Montaigne upset his fellow highbrow intellectuals because he liked to discuss flatulence, aka passing gas, farting, cutting the cheese. He even wrote a treatise on farting and other bodily functions, once saying, "Kings and philosophers defecate, and so do ladies." In spite of his entreaties to help make the human race comfortable with such bodily taboos, public farting doesn't go down well in most cultures. Well, apparently if you are invited to eat in an Inuit household, you can show your appreciation for the meal by letting one rip post-prandial. Even though we fart on average about 14 times a day, we are usually discreet about it. Not so much for the Yanomami tribe in South America, who are said to fart as a greeting. Taboo or not taboo, that is the question. We might do well to remember that our way of living is not the right way, but a way. Montaigne believes we should be curious about our taboos, deconstruct them, and at times get over them. Then again, how would you feel if your granddad turned up to Thanksgiving dinner with his new farting fiance, who was actually his cousin, with a gift of dog and cat stew and an appetite for dinner destruction? Could you handle that? Let us know in the comments. And please tell us about any unusual taboos in your country. If you like this video, be sure to check out our other video called What a Dollar Gets You Around the World.
Okay, well, thank you so much for holding on and staying with me throughout this video. And I think we've learned some interesting things here so far. Um, just wanted to ask for anyone that can volunteer a little information if about what you felt about this video. What did you learn differently? Hello, anyone there? Hello?
I
I
thought
am.
it was really, oh, sorry.
Oh,
Who,
sorry.
who am I speaking to?
Matthew.
Hi, Matthew. What did you think
Hi.
about this, finding out about the taboos around the world?
What my connection would allow me to see. I thought it was pretty interesting. Well, this video really just pushes in the idea that we need to be more open about other cultures. Like my dad, when he was in the Air Force, served a year in Korea, and to be polite, he had to learn new customs, such like he had to try dog and
Right.
like just learning all the different basics. So the youngest cooks for the group, um, guests normally are treated as like he compared it to royalty almost when he was with his friends. They really he compared it to them treating him like royalty, which I thought was very fascinating.
Right, absolutely. I think that is something that you do find in traveling throughout Asia for sure. They are definitely ones to extend, oh, just such hospitality. Probably hence why I stayed there for so long, over a decade. So that's quite a bit. Yeah. So this whole thing, yeah, it's learning about what we might deem as, weird or disgusting is something that's totally legit in other areas. Certain things that I learned when I first traveled to China is, being in the educational arena. A lot of the teachers have a tendency to do their grading or marking papers using red ink. I mean, I think all of us from elementary school on up to high school, whenever you get a graded paper back, you might see your grade in red or whatever. Was correct or not. But in Asia, using red ink depicts death. Also, the number 4. In certain games that we play, sometimes we're having to select numbers, like if you're kind of teaming off and you'll say 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, in China, no one wanted to be 4 because it was, a taboo. So we tend to just kind of have to go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, in order not to offend. Also, here, whereas in Asia, number 4 might be a taboo, where sometimes they don't even have the 4th floor, whereas in the States, in the Western world, the number 13 often depicts negativity or bad luck. So there are other things that definitely have that we've learned with regard to different taboos that we think you can never do. I love what Matthew says. Yeah, it teaches us to be more open once we're getting to know other individuals. So thanks so much for your comment. Okay, so let's take a closer look at what is cultural identity, or how is it represented symbolically? Well, the definition of symbolic culture is really the ability to learn and to transmit certain behaviors and traditions that are passed from one generation on to the next by this invention of things, and they are also known as symbols. And certain symbols have to do with certain cultural patterns or related to arts and styles of art or architecture and or pastime. So this is what we look at the meaning of symbolic culture as referring to. Let's take a look at this short video clip.
You're about to cross a street. what do you do? If there are no cars coming, do you stay the crosswalk waiting for the light to change, or do you just go for it? Do you look left first before you cross, or do you look right? Or maybe you just dart across the street shouting, "Hey, I'm walking here." No matter what you do in this situation, it's going to depend on culture. Now, you may be thinking, how can something like crossing the street be a cultural phenomenon? Isn't culture like opera and galas and fancy art openings with tiny hors d'oeuvres? Or maybe you think culture is bigger than all that culture is your heritage, traditions that have been passed down for generations, like quinceañeras, bar mitzvahs, or sweet 16 parties. The fact is, all of these things, street crossings, fine arts, and traditional rites of passage, they are all part of culture. Culture is the way that non-material objects like thoughts, action, language, and values come together with material objects to form a way of life. So you can basically break culture down into two main components: things and ideas. When you're crossing the road, you can see markers of your culture in the things around you: the street signs, the width of the road, the speed and style of the cars. This is material culture, the culture of things. Books, buildings, food, clothing, transportation. It can be everything from iconic monuments like the Statue of Liberty to something as simple as a crosswalk sign that counts down how many seconds you have to cross the street. But a lot of the culture that's packed into crossing the street is non-material too. We interpret the color red to mean stop because our culture has assigned red as a symbol for stop and green for go. And if you grew up in a country where cars drive on the right side of the road, your parents probably taught you to look left first before crossing. This is non-material culture, the culture of ideas. It's made up of the intangible creations of human society: values, symbols, customs, ideals. Instead of the Statue of Liberty, it's the idea of liberty and what it means to be free. For our purposes as sociologists, we'll mainly be focusing on this second type of culture and its three main elements: symbols, values and beliefs, and norms. Symbols include anything that carries a specific meaning that's recognized by people who share a culture. Like a stop sign or a gesture. If I do this, you probably know that I mean hold on a sec. Nonverbal gestures like this are a form of language, which is itself a symbolic system that people within a culture can use to communicate. Language is more than just the words you speak or write, and it's not just a matter of English or French or Arabic. The type of language you use in one cultural setting may be entirely different than what you'd use in another. Take how you talk to people online. New linguistic styles have sprung up that convey meaning to other people online because internet culture. See, there's one right there. If you're internet fluent, me saying because and then a noun makes perfect sense as a way of glossing over a complicated explanation. But if you're not familiar with that particular language, it just seems like bad grammar. Whether it's written, spoken, or nonverbal, language allows us to share the things that make up our culture, a process known as cultural transmission. And one view of language is that it not only lets us communicate with each other, but that it also affects how people within a culture see the world around them. This theory, known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, argues that a person's thoughts and actions are influenced by the cultural lens created by the language they speak. Let's go to the thought bubble to see an example of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis in action. What gender is the moon? For English speakers, this question might just conjure images of the man in the moon, but in many languages, nouns have genders. And in some languages, the moon is feminine, like the Spanish la luna. But in others, the moon is masculine, like the German der Mond. And this affects how Spanish and German people perceive the moon. In one study, Spanish and German people were asked to rate objects which were gendered in their language with reference to certain traits, like, is the moon beautiful? Is the moon rugged? Is the moon forceful? The study found that for those whose language used a masculine article, objects were more strongly associated with stereotypically masculine traits like forcefulness. Another study found that when a name was assigned to an object and the name matched the gender of the word for it, it was easier for people to remember the name. Like Maria Moon tended to be remembered more readily by Spanish speakers than by German speakers. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Now, I should mention that the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is one that researchers are divided on. Benjamin Lee Whorf, the American linguist who helped shape this theory, did his original research on indigenous languages like Hopi and Inuit, and since then, anthropologists have argued that some of his findings don't hold up. For example, Whorf famously claimed that because the Hopi language describes time differently, the Hopi people think of time differently. But anthropological evidence about the Hopi people suggests otherwise, and Whorf's study led to a strange and false stereotype that the Hopi people, quote, have no sense of time. Sociology is an evolving field, and academic disagreements like this are just one reason that we study language and how it shapes our society. But if language helps us communicate, shape, and pass on culture, the next element of culture is what helps us organize culture into moral categories. Values are the cultural standards that people use to decide what's good or bad, what's right or wrong. They serve as the ideals and guidelines that we live by. Beliefs, by contrast, are more explicit than values. Beliefs are specific ideas about what people think is true about the world. So, for example, an American value is democracy, while a common belief is that a good political system is one where everyone has the opportunity to vote. Different cultures have different values, and these values can help explain why we see different social structures around the world. Western countries like the United States tend to value individualism and stress the importance of each person's own needs, whereas Eastern countries like China tend to value collectivism and stress the importance of groups over individuals. These different values are part of why you're more likely to see young adults in the US living separately from their parents, and more likely to see multi-generational households in China. Cultural values and beliefs can also help form the guidelines for behavior within that culture. These guidelines are what we call norms, or the rules and expectations that guide behavior within a society. So giving up your seat for an elderly person? Great. Picking your nose in public? Gross. These are two ways of talking about norms. A norm simply relates to what we think is normal, whether something is either culturally accepted or not. And we have three main types of norms. The first are what we call folkways. Folkways are the informal little rules that kind of go without saying. It's not illegal to violate a folkway, but if you do, there might be ramifications, or what we call negative sanctions. Like if you walk onto an elevator and stand facing the back wall instead of the door, you won't get in trouble, but other people are going to give you some weird looks. And sometimes breaking a folkway can be a good thing and score you some positive sanctions from certain parts of society. Like your mom might ground you for getting a lip ring, but your friends might think it's really cool. Another type of norm are mores, which are more official than folkways and tend to be codified or formalized as the stated rules and laws of a society. When mores are broken, you almost always get a negative sanction, and they're usually more severe than just strange looks. Standing backward in the elevator might make you the office weirdo, but you'll probably get fired if you come into work topless, because there are strict rules about what kinds of clothing, or lack thereof, are appropriate for the workplace. Hawaiian shirts? Probably not. No shirt? You're fired. But mores aren't universal. You may get fired for showing up at work without a shirt, but men can lay on the beach shirtless or walk down the street with no problem. For women, these norms are different. In the United States, cultural norms about women's bodies and sexuality mean that it's illegal for women to go topless in public. But then, in parts of Europe, social norms are more lax about nudity, and it's not uncommon for women to also be shirtless at the beach. The last type of norm is the most serious of the three. Taboo. Taboos are the norms that are crucial to a society's moral center, involving behaviors that are always negatively sanctioned. Taboo behaviors are never okay, no matter the circumstance, and they violate your very sense of decency. So, killing a person, taboo or not? Your first instinct might be to say that yes, killing is awful. But while most cultures agree that life is sacred and murder should be illegal, it's not always considered wrong. Most societies say it's okay to kill in times of war or in self-defense. So what is a taboo? Cannibalism, incest, and child molestation are common examples of behavior that we see as taboo. Yes, you can kill someone in self-defense, but if you pull a Hannibal Lecter and eat that person, you're going to jail, whether it started out as self-defense or not. So don't do that. Ever. Norms like these and many others help societies function well, but norms can also be a kind of constraint, a social control that holds people back. Some norms can be bad, like ones that encourage unhealthy behavior, like smoking or binge drinking. But not all norms have clearly defined moral distinctions, like the way a culture's emphasis on competition pushes people towards success, but also discourages cooperation. And that's the tricky thing about culture. Most of the time you don't notice the cultural forces that are shaping your thoughts and actions because they just seem normal. That's why sociologists study culture. We can't notice whether our values and our norms are good or bad unless we step back and look at them with the analytical eye of a sociologist. Today we learned what culture is and the difference between material and non-material culture. We learned about three things that make up culture: symbols, values and beliefs, and norms. We looked at how language influences culture through the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis and discussed the three types of norms, folkways, mores, and taboos, which govern our daily life. Crash Course Sociology is filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney studio in Missoula, Montana, and it's made with the help of all of these nice people. Our animation team is Thought Cafe, and Crash Course is made with...
Okay, I think she is, first of all, delightful, and I really just so enjoy her energy. We've learned quite a bit about some new terms having to do with specific symbols, those values, and of course, norms. So first I'd like to pose the question, we'll go first, any volunteers that, can you address what is the difference between a folkway and a more? Anyone have explanation where they can clarify the difference or give examples of either one? What is a moray? Okay, no volunteers. I'll be happy to volunteer someone. How about Andrew? Andrew, are you there?
Yeah, I am. I'm right here.
Oh yeah, AJ. AJ, yeah, you're there. What you want to comment for me
Yep.
on what's the difference? What did you learn the difference between this folkway versus a moray?
I remember I was taking I was taking a class on it. But like with a folkway, what it is it's kind of traditional behavior, while moray is kind of like newer. So they, like the difference is that one's based on newer traditions, one is based on older traditions. An example would be maybe same-sex marriage in a way. As some people like believe in it, some people don't, and it's based on traditions. You also have what else as well? What could be another example of a new folklore? Oh, wait, the nuclear family. As you know, like traditionally, you have a family of a mother, a father, and 3 siblings.
Uh-huh.
But nowadays you have the multicultural example where you basically have the grandfather, the grandmother, the mom, the dad, and grandchildren all within the same realm.
Yeah. Yeah.
But nowadays, you have more non-traditional families.
Yeah, very nice examples. Yes, and also, some of these folkways have to do with trends that perhaps might come. It's certain things that you might do to be a little off color, just to maybe a form of drawing attention to oneself. And there's not a specific law that says you're not allowed to do it, but it's just kind of taking a little risk in doing something that's a little different. Yes, whereas that moray, social mores have to do with where the society says, oh yeah, it's cool to do that, such as on the beach of Nice, France, it's okay to be topless, and where it's socially acceptable, whereas you could definitely be arrested if you did that in Southern California. So those are some of the differences. And then we know, of course, taboos. A taboo is definitely one of those it's either a material thing or an idea that or non-material idea that has some type of deep-rooted consequence, if you will, whereas it may just really cause someone to really be deeply offended, and that social faux pas, yeah, that is really something that is not too cool and not accepted within that entire culture. So we're seeing things are changing, trends are changing. Lastly, I'd like to ask another volunteer, do you think that cultural assumption is something that's good or bad? Or assimilation? Is assimilation to new cultures good or bad? What would you say? Any volunteers?
Are you asking like assimilation being like adjusting to
Right.
culture?
Yeah, let me clarify a little bit. So oftentimes we know that the United States is a melting pot of so many different cultures. People come here, sometimes they don't even really know the language. So they have all of these new things that they have to learn. So how much is appropriate to assimilate into this new culture? Is it good or bad? And or, how good or bad is it to have to leave some of these traditional things, back home and not bring them with you? What's your thought on that?
I think that it's really important to be able to, I guess, be flexible enough to kind of adjust to things like that. I think that there is a certain value in being able to assimilate to people's cultures very quickly, but at the same time, I think it's equally important to kind of hold on to your roots and where you've come from and still be proud of that, and like kind of have some kind of identity in that. So I think that there has to be a balance of, you know, finding who you are and identifying with a culture wherever you've come from and kind of understanding that, but still being willing to accept another person's culture and adjust to that.
Oh, that was very well said. Very well said. Thank you. And who's speaking? I'm sorry, I don't have the list of who's speaking because I'm on.
Jalen
Oh,
Treviso.
thank you, Jalen. Okay, very good. So, yeah, I love that. Another good example is what most parents are very concerned about when their children leave for university. And, you know, it's that belief that, wow, I hope they don't assimilate to some of the more, you know, accepted social norms that might be on a university campus, and, you know, without eliminating those values that, you know, have made them into who they are. So, you know, that's a big concern basically with parents when, you know, when kids are moving out and they're changing. So the goal is to experience new things. However, to keep your own identity and those values, they're very, very key. All right, now we're going to move into cultural patterns. Next up, we have cultural patterns. So these cultural patterns typically are shared beliefs, additionally shared values or norms that exist within a social practice, and they become stable over time, and they actually lead to certain behaviors and similarities throughout various situations that occur, such as there are like 4 main components that we're learning about the cultural patterns, and these have to do with sheer beliefs of an idea that people assume that is true throughout the world. So, you know, we really want to look at certain patterns that take place having to do with different communication styles, different attitudes, and how they handle conflict, for example, a different approach in tackling tasks, and or decision-making styles and attitudes towards how we disclose and share information. Those are some cultural patterns that kind of take place with regard to cultural differences. Additionally, we look at these major symbols again as language, norms, values, and artifacts, even having to do with, for example, values that truly distinguish, for example, the United States, how we are included as individualists or, you know, an individualistic nation. We're very competitive, and, you know, we really have opportunities to commitment to work ethic.
Sup, y'all, and welcome to Cultural Patterns and Processes, Part 1. In this video, we're going to look at this key question at what are local and popular cultures. We'll look into perceiving culture, and to begin, let's define folk culture, which is usually relatively small in area as well as small with respect to the number of people. It is naturally rural and incorporates a cohesive and homogeneous population, processing similar and often unique cultural traits. For instance, modern country music, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, had its roots in the more humble backroads along the Appalachian Mountains in Tennessee and Kentucky. By contrast, popular culture is larger, usually urban, incorporates heterogeneous populations, and is quickly changing. In fact, the pace of change has seemingly only increased as technologies such as social media connect more people of greater diversity. Companies and individuals can actually create popular culture, and this can be extremely lucrative. Do you recognize this man? Even though he has not played a professional basketball game since 2003, Michael Jordan is still one of the most recognizable names not only in sports, but in all of popular culture. This is in no small part due to his iconic shoes, the famous Air Jordans. Produced by Nike, debuting in 1984, they have been among the best-selling sneakers every year since. The big three sports in the United States are basketball, football, and baseball. And these teams, along with the industries associated with them, generate enormous fan bases while reining in billions of dollars a year. Now, do you recognize this man? He is none other than Tony Hawk, the Birdman, arguably the most successful skateboarder in history. While the big three sports are still the kings of the US sports industry, they increasingly face competition from the video game industry, of which Tony Hawk has been very successful, the X Games, highlighting alternative sports like skateboarding, UFC, or the Ultimate Fighting Championship, as well as the most ubiquitous of world sports, football, or soccer. And just maybe you recognize another cultural reference in this image. To investigate further, we look at a concept related to folk culture, but is defined as local culture, which is typically small, where the people see themselves as a community, and they seek to preserve their traits and customs. Unlike folk culture, which is defined as rural in nature, local cultures may be rural, urban, or even suburban. Now, in any cultural group, there is the material culture, which consists of tangible things: art, houses, clothing, sports, food, etc. These constitute a culture's artifacts. Whereas the non-material culture include intangible things, such as beliefs, practices, values, and aesthetics, which relates to what local cultures consider attractive or fashionable. These constitute a culture's mentefacts. In contrast to local cultures, globalization is the expansion of economic, political, and cultural processes to a global scale. What you see here is an Aborigine in Australia playing a didgeridoo. This image is notable because you can see how an artifact from a local culture has become an iconic instrument recognized at a global scale. So, in an age of globalization, where popular culture diffuses quickly, what do local cultures do to maintain their customs and avoid assimilation? To fully answer this question, we must first define assimilation, which is the process where people lose their original cultural traits when in contact with people of a different society. From around 1790 and even into the early 1900s, the US government had an official policy of assimilation. Indigenous people were instructed on how to be Americans through education in schools, churches, and government agencies. Indians who assimilated more successfully were often rewarded with better jobs and citizenship. However, today, many American Indians have worked hard to revive the old customs of their local cultures. So, to understand how local cultures are sustained, they essentially have two general goals. One is to keep other cultures out, and they can achieve this by fervently teaching the young about their cultural heritage, their history, and repeatedly emphasize their unique cultural traits and complexes. Another way local cultures sustain themselves is to keep their own culture in, so as to not water down their values or principles. They will sometimes seek to avoid cultural appropriation, which is the process where other cultures adopt customs, knowledge, and icons to use for their own benefit. An example of this can be seen with the recent controversy surrounding several Native American groups petitioning for the Washington Redskins NFL team to change their mascot to something they consider less offensive. This is in contrast to a seemingly similar situation with the Seminole Tribe of Florida and the eponymous mascot of Florida State University. The Seminole Tribe and university leaders have forged a mutual partnership in which the Seminoles are portrayed honorably and with respect, such as the depiction of Chief Osceola before each home football game. And the Seminoles in turn receive monetary benefits as well. Often, people in rural areas can maintain their local cultures more easily than in urban areas. One of the Anabaptist groups in the US, the Amish, were originally Protestants from Germany and Switzerland. They tend to stand out because of their plain clothes, their pacifistic ways, and especially because they shun electricity due to their interpretation of certain verses from the Bible. Amish communities are concentrated in states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, and Indiana, among others. Another Anabaptist group that has some similarities, yet some stark differences from the Amish, are the Hutterites, who typically live in communal colonies of around 100 people and are concentrated in Minnesota, the Dakotas, Montana, and the Canadian provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Unlike the Amish, they do accept technologies that help them farm, although they do attempt to refrain from technology that might disrupt their way of life. Local cultures are surrounded by the larger and more imposing popular cultures around them, so they often engage in neolocalism by seeking out their regional culture and reinvigorating it in response to the uncertainty of the changing modern world. Many local cultures exist in urban settings within tightly knit ethnic neighborhoods, or what are sometimes referred to as ethnic islands. El Barrio, which means neighborhood, in Spanish Harlem, New York City, is a great example where Puerto Ricans have adjusted their cultural landscape with flags, signs written in Spanish, and authentic shops and restaurants. Another example is around Calle Ocho, or 8th Street, in what's vernacularly known as Little Havana in Miami, where Cubans have long since migrated after Fidel Castro took power in Cuba back in the 1950s. Because local cultures stand out from the popular culture around it, some of their cultural traits can be commodified, in which a good or service that was not previously regarded as a commodity is then bought or sold for profit. For instance, 200 years ago, witnessing Amish people going about their daily work would not be very different from most others around them. But today, tourists can pay money to see just that. And while partnerships can be made to benefit both parties, many local cultures resist commodification, as was the case with Lakota Indians suing a brewery that used the name Crazy Horse, perhaps their most famous leader from the past. When cultures are commodified, the question of authenticity arises, in which a stereotypical image or experience conveys an otherwise dynamic and complex local culture. Traveling to the World Showcase in the Disney theme park Epcot, you can experience more than a dozen world cultures. While much of the experience may be fairly authentic, in which most of the actors hail from the respective countries they represent, it still shows only parts of these cultural landscapes, and often in an idyllic, if not somewhat inaccurate, manner.
That is correct.
Okay. Well, that had full impact of a variety of new information. So with that in mind,
hey guys, what's up? It's welcome back or welcome to my channel. It's been such a long time since I've sat down and been able to talk to you guys. I hope you guys are staying healthy, safe, staying at home, and
okay, now getting back to those patterns. So in that, it was quite a bit of information about, I love the idea of talking about the different processes that take place, such as the folk style, then pop culture, folk culture, pop culture, local culture, then going into globalization, and talking about, again, assimilation and appropriation. Some of these terms that we often hear but don't necessarily look at those of how they do affect different patterns and lifestyles that we look into on a daily basis. So here I have just a little information of what the actual cultural value patterns are. Primarily, they have to do with equality, group allegiance, cooperation and versus competitiveness, dealing with the unknown, and the perception of time. And so these are some of those values that cause us to look into how we look and perceive and develop our value system. Okay, so as we examine cultural values, we need to understand that these values are the core principles and the ideas that individuals and entire communities base what is important to them, and it helps them to exist as a culture. It's really made up of several parts, such as using customs, which are, certain traditions and rituals that take place, and these values, which are our core beliefs, and culture, which all have to do with guiding principles and values having to do with rich and deep cultural beliefs. Let's take a look at this quick video to better illustrate an example of this.
Cultural values. In this video, we'll review the concept of values and how the values cultural groups hold can be used to understand human behavior. The information in this video provides a general overview of values. Please consult assigned readings for more in-depth information. As the course progresses, many of the ideas discussed in this video will be covered in more detail. What are values? Values are shared ideas on what is good versus bad, ethical versus unethical, just versus unjust, reasonable versus unreasonable, and the like. Values are what people use to judge the rightness or wrongness of what goes on in the world around them. In order to function and survive, societies create a collection of shared rules and norms based largely on their shared cultural values. Adults pass down what they know about proper communication behavior to their children, and, as this passing down of knowledge continues through the generations, cultural values can persist within cultures for hundreds of years or longer. Most cultural values are learned before the age of 10, and once learned, it is difficult to unlearn them. The values we learn in childhood can influence the way we move through the world for the rest of our lives, and, since they are mostly invisible to us, we aren't even aware they influence our views. People tend to be drawn to others who behave similarly to them and who value and like the same types of things that they do. Humans have discussed this need for group member similarity since ancient times, as the idea of birds of a feather flock together is mentioned in Plato's Republic. In fact, human connection is so important that much of an individual's time is dedicated to building relationships and maintaining group membership. Group membership can be separated into two general categories: those who are in your group and those who are out of your group. Those in your group are perceived as sharing similar ideas, likes, interests, beliefs, and values. The similarities among in-group members draw them together. It is not uncommon for people in the same in-group to feel related, even if they are not from the same family. Those that are not considered part of your group, out-group members, are perceived as not sharing the same principal ideas, likes, interests, beliefs, or values. Dissimilarity can be perceived as so significant and the ideas in contention so fundamental that people of outgroups are considered complete outsiders. When it comes to making judgments on people's behaviors, humans tend not to use the same rules to judge in-group members as they do to judge out-group members. Only members of the in-group deserve full consideration, care, support, benefits, and the like. Those outside of the group are not entitled to these things and are treated differently. Understanding how obligations and beliefs differ for in-group and out-group members can help explain why contradictions seem to exist in belief structures. For instance, a government may claim that all people in their country deserve free health care, as it should be a fundamental right, but then only make it available to its citizens. Immigrants without citizenship should not receive the same benefit. A person may believe it's important to be polite when interacting with others, but is only polite to people who speak her or his language and is rude or cold to people who speak a foreign language. Or, a group may believe that people who are soulmates and truly love each other should live together, but only if the soulmates are comprised of one woman and one man. As humans, we belong to many groups, and some group ties are stronger than others. We can identify with national groups, ethnic groups, intellectual groups, religious groups, regional groups, and even neighborhood and family groups. And when making decisions, each of our in-groups' values are considered, and only those for which we feel most connected to are given all the benefits, rights, and considerations available. In summary, all human groups maintain values. The values are learned early in childhood and endure throughout a lifetime, influencing how people understand and judge the world and others around them. For the most part, the values we hold are hidden to us and work in the background of our thinking, influencing our responses to things around us. We align ourselves with people who seem to hold the same values as we do, forming in-groups, and see ourselves as different than those who do not share the same values, keeping them in out-groups. People do not feel obligated to give people in out-groups the same benefits, considerations, or fair judgments as those in their in-groups. Knowing the role of values in the formation and maintenance of human societies and how value structures influence human behavior is necessary to understanding why humans of different cultures perceive and move through the world in very different ways. One way of comparing and understanding behavioral differences among societal groups is through the analysis of cultural patterns. Common themes that occur across all cultures include a focus on categories of equality, extent of group allegiance, appropriate levels of cooperation and competitiveness, how to deal with the unknown, and perceptions of time. These themes and others will be examined more closely as the course progresses.
Good information as well, having to do with these cultural values. So let's just get a little input on how these values come about. Let's have a little discussion about that. Let's ask, let's see, Drew, are you there? Is Drew available?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Drew, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing better, I must admit. I'm still sneezy and scratchy throat and all, but I'm getting better. So we just learned a lot of good information about developing these shared values and such. Can you tell me anything that you got out of this past little video clip? What did you learn from it?
About the shared values, it was kind of something that you were talking about earlier. I thought that like across different cultures, you can appreciate something like shared appreciations between two different cultures. So like somewhere across the world, we would value something a little bit different than they would.
Right.
Kind of going back to that video, but the taboo almost too. Like
Right.
different things you can
Yeah, go
appreciate
ahead.
will be different things that people would dislike.
Mm-hmm. How could you relate with the portion of discussion with the group membership when they're talking about the in-group and the out-group? Has that ever been something that you've been affected with?
Could you give me like an example of what like an in-group would be? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, we talk about basically that shared values. Typically, you know, she used the example of birds of a feather flock together, right? So, you know, interestingly enough, if you're involved in sports and you might like to hang out with other people that are in sports, you know, if we are Christian people or believers, you might want to hang out with that group of people. So oftentimes, you know, it can be a great experience or it can be a negative experience. So can you share if you know some of your you know experience in group, out group?
I would say like an example for me, how you were talking about that, is about like being like a believer. So that's partially why I chose GCU. So everyone I've met down here, I can't tell you that everyone I've met down here is a believer or whatever, but all my professors have been, a lot of my friends I've made. So I guess like that would be kind of a little group that I have flocked towards and got along with.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so just to reaffirm, you know, what was being illustrated throughout this past video is that when we do have these shared values, gives us that opportunity to develop culture together and to share that particular culture. And, you know, we have with these shared values, we also have the other side of it where it can be negative, where unfortunately you know, we have to learn to allow other people to come in. I think, you know, at GCU, I mean, you know, part of being a believer is that we want to welcome other individuals in and not really shun perhaps disbelievers. Everyone at GCU is not a Christian. You know, they're very different religious backgrounds and things like that. So the point is that we have to remember that within this shared value that we don't need to you know, disassociate. We need to be inviting and to make sure that we are not judging others just because they're not part of our group. And so I think really in our society today, this is one of the biggest attributes that we can apply as just as individuals, you know, to try to embrace others and you know, avoid this disassociation, but more invite into our culture. So thank you so much for sharing, Drew. Very good analogy. And just to share a little bit about some of those ideas that shared values. All groups maintain values. All of us have certain values. And we do see that we've learned them early on since, you know, like by the time we're 10, most of our values have been implemented, you know. We have, I find it very interesting about, we really look at our values are oftentimes invisible. There's this invisible awareness that's there that we have these beliefs here, but usually they're kind of down under, and they evolve under certain situations and under pressure sometimes. We have these influential judgments that we do have on other people that we really have to be careful with. You know, other individuals' values aren't just out there all the time. We don't know what individuals value until we start getting to know each other and having open communication and asking good questions. So yeah, oftentimes finally we align ourselves with people of the same values. So yeah, that's a quick little overview of that. So now let's go into the next section. Next up, we'll review cultural language. Well, as we know, language is really intrinsic, and it's used to express or as an expression of culture. We utilize this really as a means of communication having to do with our values and our beliefs and our customs, and it's so important for us to use as a strong social function, and it really holds on to our feelings and allows us to be represented within group identity and solidarity. It is a means of which all groups and cultures offer a collective tradition, and it really helps to exchange shared values, and it's just really the way we convey our messages through various groups and cultures.
In high context cultures, yes may mean yes, yes may mean no, and yes may mean maybe, depending on how the yes is messaged. So it's not just the words, it's actually the facial expression, the tonality of the voice, and the body language. Whereas in low context cultures, yes means yes and no means no. I mean what I say and I say what I mean. Direct. Think of some of the issues that comes up. I loved Dave Ulrich's definition of listening. Listening is not about have you heard me, but have you understood what I meant. I love that definition. I thought that's really good. And here's the issue. If you come primarily from a low context culture, even when someone says no, and they say no without using the word no, you don't actually hear it. you don't hear it. So then the issue becomes, why didn't they just say no? If they couldn't perform or couldn't get that done on time, why didn't they say no? Well, they probably did, but you just didn't hear it. As I was with a meeting with a client some time ago, we were with a Korean organization, and he came out of the presentation saying, "Oh, I think that presentation went really well." I said, "I don't think it went really well." So why not? Because they said they were really interested, they would give it good consideration. I said, no, that doesn't mean that they're going to think about it. Because when they kind of sit there, they took the deep breath in. So it's just paying attention to the cues. So when we listen to people who come from high context cultures, they seem to be kind of beating around the bush. And we don't hear what they're saying. Whereas when we're coming from low context cultures, how it comes across to high context is, in fact, sometimes we come across as being very rude and very direct. They say, don't you have any heart? Can't you say it in a different way? So once again, different styles of communication. And think about that here. And once again, the thing to remember is that culture is very subjective. In Australia, we consider ourselves to be quite open and quite straight. We take pride in the fact that we call it as it is. I had a client recently who said to me, "Tom, I thought we were direct. I had a project manager who came from the United States, and at our first meeting, she had my whole team in tears." She said, "I now know what direct is. Because compared to her, we were really soft." However, compared to the Indonesians, we are direct, they're very indirect. So culture is always subjective. It's relative to your point of reference.
Okay, I love that illustration. It goes back to what we were learning having to do with the collectivism type of perspective versus the individualistic perspective, and that high and low context. Well, the individuals that have a low context form of communication with language, they're very direct. Their yes is yes, and their no is no. However, individuals that have a high context level typically come from a more individualistic or Western culture background, where they have a lot of input, they have a lot to say, and sometimes it causes a little bit of disbelief and turnoff. So language does have a strong bearing, whether or not it's just because you don't have the same first language. Maybe English is not the first language, but it has to do with the tone. It has to do with your mannerism and the nonverbal language as well. So as mentioned, culture is very subjective, and we have to really learn not only to listen, but learn to understand, as quoted by Dave Aldrich. So very nice information here. All right, I want to just have a quick little recap, and I want some of you to give me your understanding of the difference between, we've learned about what is a symbol, what is a value, what is a norm. So let's see, who am I going to go with? I'm going to go with Anne. Anne, are you there with us?
Me?
Anne, yes.
Anna.
Anna, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Couldn't read my own writing. Okay, so we've learned a few things. Can you give me a little bit of your understanding of what you've learned? What is a symbol? What are we learning about symbols?
I think what I got from it is that a symbol is more of like a general like representation of like what you might define a culture as, and then a value is kind of more what like makes up that symbol and what people believe like within that culture to make like a symbol apparent to other people.
Very good.
And then a norm would just be like what people within that culture like do on an everyday basis based on what their beliefs are.
Absolutely, very nicely done. And just to add a little bit to it, you know, we talk about there are different, you know, the symbols such as things or ideas, right? And so one has to do with the things are more material, whereas the ideas are non-material. And all of these type of symbols kind of bring together all of these different forms of the way we think and evaluate cultural differences. Very nicely said. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, let's move on to the next section. I find it interesting to look at and evaluate the word or the term cultural architect. Well, you know, I envision this as being able to really identify different structures and styles of structures having to do with the cultural perspective and the background of how the architecture has been developed and the reason behind it. I find it so interesting that it does definitely have a meaning socially as architect, and it has this manifestation and way of expressing, you know, a cultural intent. It acknowledges the way we look at and respond to, you know, cultural needs and how society has developed this way of or style which a building might be constructed. So it's really important for us to allow this cultural aspect and to really take a look at the influences of the architectural form that we see within our environment. For example, you know, here in the Southwest, in Arizona, we see a lot of adobe style as an influence of the architect that takes place in building homes and things like that. Now it's changing and it's becoming a little bit more modern, but even in the colors and the structures, it does have a tendency to mirror the mountain land and desert landscaping. So that's one aspect. You know, of course, living in China, I was definitely able to see that particular style that had that Asian flair. And so culturally, certain buildings are built and designed based on the cultural needs. So let's find out a little bit more about this meaning of cultural architect. In this next bit of information through this video clip, you're going to be introduced to a new term, vernacular, and this has to do with the idea or the speech variety used in everyday life. And so they use this term with respect to identifying social or geographical location and territory. So I just wanted to have you to listen up for that so you have a more deeper understanding of the nature of this particular tone of this video.
Hello and welcome to Vernacular Architecture of Asia, Tradition, Modernity, and Cultural Sustainability. In this course, we will explore the more complex issues in vernacular architecture. A key question we will try to answer is how do we deal with the challenges and threats to vernacular architecture and make sure that it is sustained in this modern urbanized world. In the first 3 episodes, we will look at the what and where and begin to raise the questions of why and how. For example, in episode 1, we will search for the deeper socio-cultural meaning of rural architecture. We will explore the process of building. Why do people make the building decision the way they do when constructing their built environments? Are these decisions made in a self-conscious or unself-conscious manner? In episode 2, we will look at the challenges of people migrating from villages to live in cities. How do villages adjust their way of living to effectively respond to the functional, social, and environmental constraints? How do Asian cities respond to the changes in the lifestyle and habitats brought about by the westernization and colonization of the 17th to the 20th centuries? Taking the topic of urban vernacular a step further, episode 3 looks at what we call informal settlements, or as some people would call them, illegal settlements or squatter areas in Asian cities. What common characteristics of building do these particular communities share? What lessons can we draw from them in terms of sustainable living? In the final 2 episodes, we will focus on the how and try to explore answers to a few questions that are very relevant to the current status and future development of vernacular architecture, such as how can we conserve and sustain our vernacular cultural heritage? How can we reconcile tradition and modernity? We will also cast our eyes into the future and discuss how the field of vernacular architecture might evolve and develop in the years to come. Ultimately, the goal is to help you to establish your own viewpoints about the more complex or even contradictory issues in vernacular architecture, so that you can make informed decisions regarding the protection and conservation of your local vernacular environments. So please join us.
This is an outstanding series. If any of you are interested in urban development and cultural diversity within urbanization and globalization, all of that, it's so important. I'm not going to go through all 3 of the series at this time, but you know, I did want to have a little conversation about this perspective of how architecture influences our culture. Let's talk about this just a moment. Does anyone have an idea that would like to share something that they noticed or saw or heard within this past video having to do with the cultural architecture? How about Spencer? Spencer, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, it took me a second. You wanted to hear about cultural architecture?
Yeah, were you able to see that short video clip?
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
I don't know, like, it's interesting to me, especially because I've done construction for like 11 years. So I've seen a lot of different styles of homes and everything. And it is really interesting. Just like, even in Arizona, just like different places here, it'll change to like Oklahoma where I did work this summer. Like, the houses are completely different over there. They're all different styles and stuff. And it's interesting. It's a lot more like townhouses and like big farmhouses there than like here. It's a lot more city areas and like, yeah, I don't know, like the adobe and that kind of deal as you were talking about before.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the draw that sometimes the style of home or the community has will perhaps attract a certain group of, or, you know, ethnic group of people that are drawn to a certain style. You know, in my travels, you know, of course, you'll go from one place to another, and it can be completely different with regard to if it's near the, you know, in Asia, if it's near the water area and some of these island type places, well, they have their architecture might have a lot to do with weather conditions and rain. So their homes might be off the ground, you know? And so it has a lot to do with safety and maybe even the nature of the workforce that's there. So, you know, when you really start traveling around and looking at the cultural differences, it certainly does have an effect on, you know, how we envision certain things. You know, different areas, lower income areas, you know, certain things might be a lot more inconvenient based upon, you know, the living conditions and the way the homes are built. But within those areas, whether or not is there squatters or living places illegally, even in the homeless communities that we see, there is a community that develops in that area of like-mindedness, and they tend to flock together. So yeah, it's very interesting. When in my undergrad was in social ecology, and we had to really look into the entire social environment having to do with mental health condition, public policy planning, having to do with the laws and the court systems and things like that, and ecology. And all of that matters as far as when our society is being constructed. So this cultural impact and cultural identity is very far reaching as how it affects us. Thanks for your contribution. Within this series, we're learning about, okay, we're going to move into cultural pastimes. Next, we're going to take a look at the symbolic meaning behind the cultural pastimes that have been indicated here in this particular section. And a lot of the pastimes that we are used to have to do with things that we do in our free time, having to do with vacations and hobbies, etc. You know, America is known for baseball as being a major pastime, and other sports and sporting events. Pastimes include, listening to music and playing music, watching TV, watching movies, playing video games, training your dog, being involved with whatever that could be, having to do with a way of relaxing and separating us from the true work environment. So we use this term cultural pastimes to identify various different ways throughout the culture that we share activities and events and even holidays. So let's take a look and see of some of the cultural pastimes that we can identify with throughout the world.
Since not all of us can travel the whole world, FactPoint has brought the entire world to you. In this very interesting video we will tell you about different cultures from different societies which you may find even shocking. So let's get started. Number 1. Croatia. Croatia is popular for its national parks, beaches, and of all the things, the coastal country is also famous for its Game of Thrones appeal. But, if you are traveling in this Eastern European country, depending on where you are from, it might shock you when you learn that if you plan to stay there, it is expected from you to clean not only your own house but also the street outside of your house. There is a reason why the country is famous for its clean streets and communal civil pride. Croatia is not exception. Countries like Spain too have similar culture. Number 2. I don't want coffee. Wait. Now I want. In Ireland, it is considered rude to accept any food item from the host the first time it is being offered by them. Even if you are being offered a mouth-watering treat, pretend to decline the offer. You will be asked once again, and this time, it's absolutely okay to accept it. It might sound a weird practice, especially if you are from country like US, where a no would mean a no, and agreeing the other time might make you come off as a weird fluctuating person. Number 3. The country with no traffic rules. Food is not the only thing Lebanon is famous for. Talk to any traveler who have been to the Lebanese Republic, they would tell you that there is virtually no traffic rules at all, in the Middle Eastern country. Even if there seem to be traffic rules, everyone is speeding around you and the rules are not enforced at all. Needless to say, there are countless accidents every day on the roads of Lebanon. Number 4. Bishkesh. In Jordan, Iran and many Arab countries, if someone compliments about something you are wearing, it is considered rude at your part to not offer the same thing immediately to the person who originally complimented you. In Iran, This tradition has got its name and is called Bishkesh. One traveler shared an incident that occurred in one of the Jordan hotels where, unaware of this tradition, he complimented waiter's watch and the waiter immediately unlatched the watch and tried to push it on the traveler's hand. If you want to accept the gift, don't say yes before you have said no at least thrice. That's another aspect of this norm. Good luck. Number 5. Being friendly towards strangers. If you are from the United States, nothing special in here for you, move on. But, if you are not aware of the US culture, prepare yourself for a cultural shock when you land in the America and suddenly people you don't even know are smiling at you. They might even ask you how's your day going and not even bother to listen your reply. And, similarly, if you are an American traveling in Europe and trying to be friendly with random strangers on the streets, prepare yourself for receiving weird looks. It's fascinating how opposite two cultures can be. Number 6. Rush hours in China and Japan. Talking about opposites, it would be quite interesting to discuss how the crowd treats you in China versus how it treats you in Japan. You will find countless travelers telling you how in China, during the busy hours, everyone is pushing, cutting the line, breaking the queue and seem in hurry. They might not care even if you are a traveler. The reason is fairly obvious. China has a huge population and if you are planning to stand there and wait for your turn, you will never get an opportunity. Now when it comes to Japan, you would find yourself at the totally opposite end of the spectrum. Number 7. India. If the word diversity could be represented as a country, India would be the answer. The South Asian country has diversity in every form. The country itself is a concoction of different cultures. While there is a lot to talk about India, one cultural difference which might catch your eyes and might even shock you, especially if you are not Asian, is the sight of grown-up men walking around holding their hands, which might illusion you into thinking they are homosexuals, but in reality it is a fairly common way to express your friendliness in India, and the men are just being brothers. Number 8. Tolerance towards public drunkenness. If you are a Brit, or familiar with streets of Britain, you probably know that public drinking is taken casually and considered normal there. But the attitude towards public drunkenness when compared to Europe is totally different in the States. So much so that asking for beer in a restaurant might invite stares and a lecture on, "Sir, this is a family restaurant." Let us know in the comments what do you feel about either of the cases. Number 9. Nap time in Spain. When you visit Spain as a tourist, roaming in the Spanish street in the afternoon would make you realize that you are probably alone and nobody is around with all the shops closed. This time after the midday meal till 4 p.m. is also called siesta time in Spain, and in these early hours of afternoon you would probably find no one in streets or in the shops except for probably you yourself. Number 10. Balinese funerals. If you are new to Bali, funeral processions might look like a party or wedding to you. Funeral procession in the Indonesian island are full of food, music and songs. They are very expensive too. Often the body is buried inside a container till arrangements for funeral can be done, or the auspicious day arrives. Balinese funerals are very expensive and the body may be interred until the family can afford it or until there is a group funeral planned by the village or family when costs will be less. Additionally, if the departed was a court servant, member of the court or minor noble, the cremation can be postponed up to several years to coincide with the cremation of their prince. Cultures can vary greatly. Did we miss your country? Why don't you share with us in comment section below?
Wow, that was, took you on a tour, a global tour of things. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about the arts. Next up, we're going to examine how the arts influence society and specifically cultural arts. And, within the global exchange of ideas and creativity, we look at cultural art as the way that we enjoy different art forms, whether it's graphics, print, music as an art, and or dance as an art or an art form. So many of these ideas and definitions really take on the creative aspects and the creative thinkings of how different cultures create, and they use their uniqueness to help to share heartfelt innovation, visual art, even theater, film, and concerts as we know it. But let's take a look and see what else we can discover here having to do with global influences on our society, having to do with art and cultural arts. Historically, I think I have viewed cultural art with respect of those historical finds and artifacts that we see geologists uncover, and they have deep cultural value. And so I thought it was important that we understand the term that social sciences specifically use the term within anthropology and um, different ethnology, and as a form of creating human communication. And throughout the decades, we find that it becomes very controversial with regard to who do these cultural artifacts really belong to. So let's learn a little bit more about some of these artifacts and what they have to do with. We often see it in pottery and or weaponry when culturally they make weapons that now they're so beautiful. We use it as artifacts or artwork or art pieces, even tools that have been used in cultural um, necessity are now looked upon cultural artifacts, and they give such depth to our culture and how others experience the way of life. So let's take a look at some other ways that culture and cultural effects and popular art do affect us globally. At this time, I'm not going to show this video because we're running out of time, but I have included the videos in the announcements if you want to view them a little later. In our modern society, cultural relation roles, they are really growing and really ever changing, where individuals they have to take a look, or we have to take a closer look as to these new roles that are emerging with culture and interculture relationships. In general, we know that relationships are pretty far reaching. They can be an example of individuals having a relationship between a student and a professor, and or a counselor, your best friend, your family relationship, marital relationships. And so it basically has to do with understanding these new roles that are emerging. And within cultural exchange, we have to be aware of things that are appropriate and accepted, having to do with cultural manners. With one group, when you are learning and getting to know other individuals within a relationship, you have to have a clear understanding of why these roles may be different. Let's take a look. Now, it's important for us to take a look at cultural relation roles. And with that, there is something that's important to take a look at having to do with role relationships. So we do find that role relationships has to do with identifying the role. For example, the relationship or the relative hierarchy that has to do with the position or rank within the family, the group, etc. So this role is something that is prescribed as a set of behaviors having to do with maybe even power, as we looked at that power distance as a set of behaviors that is expected to be fulfilled within a certain role. Who takes the role of what position, etc. So roles are specifically prescribed with whom, about, and what, and how to interact. So this is very diverse, having to do with the various roles that we use, having to do with roles and communication, and how it is actually linked. Roles help to give us permission of how we're going to communicate, and that having that social identity, using this total combination of an individual or a group's role having to do with a part of the individual, or that self concept that we talked about, and being an individual. That self concept is actually something, of course, derived from that person's membership within the group. So it's very important for us to be able to identify that hierarchy having to do with these. Well, the text mentions 4 dimensions of cross-cultural role variation, and so we look at the first scale having to do with personalness, and then something that's more formal, or the formality. So we look at the personal and interpersonal scale having to do with the difference with, for example, US and Korea. US is very personal, and it states on the same scale that on the other spectrum, Korea is impersonal. And with formality, Korea has a high level on the spectrum of formality, whereas the US is more informal. Additionally, we look at that hierarchy, where we look at Korea tends to be extremely strict, and US on that hierarchy is a little more loose. And there's that deviation of where the US typically has tendency to allow and give permission, and on the other end of the scale, where Korea is utilized or looked upon as not being very permissive and not allowing certain things, not breaking tradition. So this is one way of really looking at how these roles really have to do with how we have role differentiation, and on that different scale and approach. Another area is really looking at the social stratification, having to do with the culture's organizational process within the roles, and that hierarchy having to do with giving that vertical status, and that particular structure on the scale, and that spectrum. So has a lot to do with family groups and how we do have this hierarchy within family. And I know most families do have a certain way that we communicate with each other. Okay, so now we have pretty much gone through all of the different varieties having to do with the different patterns that will really help with your assignment and the upcoming paper. And if you have any other questions at this particular time, it's a good time to go for it. Any questions? Okay, nothing yet. All right. I'm going to stop here. We'll pick up the information probably next week. But just a second. Let me get out of this. I want to quickly show you and just confirm the upcoming, when you have this peer review. Do you have any questions on that peer review and what's involved in that?
Question for the essay for this weekend. You sent us in the announcements. You sent us a layout. It's kind of confusing. The beginning is like, I don't know if that the bullet points that you gave us, that's supposed to be the first introduction, supposed to be that long, or
you mean on the outline that I sent you?
Yeah, it's
well, no, the outline. Well, first of all, you need to realize that the paper is you up to 2,000, what is it? I'm sorry, 1,200 words. So the outline that I sent is only giving you the perspective of where and what you need to add into that particular area. After you read your instructions for the paper, basically you have to cover those individual points. You have to make sure first you're going to identify what culture you are going to identify and you're going to be working on. Okay, so you need to make sure that you select, for example, you might say, I'm going to give a cultural overview with the culture of Hawaii. And so you're going to then identify primarily these points that you've been learning through your text and through the videos and through the lecture. And then you're going to identify what are the cultural patterns, for example, in the Hawaiian culture. So, we've gone through what some of what are their values? You need to address that. What are their, what structure do they have? What type of architecture is there? What type of pastimes do they have there? So that's where you're going to identify those. And then in the next section, you're going to make sure that you're using your resources and according to APA style, and making sure that you're identifying all of these points. And then, of course, you give your conclusion, and you have to have at least 5 references. So the outline that I gave you is specifically coincides with what the paper is asking for. So if you just, once you make the selection on which culture you're going to identify and discuss, then you just follow suit with that information. Does that help you, Jaleesa?
Yes.
You sure?
Kind of. Thank you.
Kind of. If you want to stay and ask me a little after, no problem, okay? No problem. Anyone else have any questions along those lines? Hi, Spencer. Are you saying? Okay. No. Anna, any questions? All right. Let me go back to screen share just a second because I want to show you. I hope I can show you this real quickly. Yeah. So on our portal, you need to make sure that there's a process it states on, you need to first go to connect and you go to forums. And here under forums, you see culture and perception peer review. So what you're going to do here is you need to follow the instructions that are here. It says that you will need to complete your peer review worksheet, and you need to download that worksheet. It should be under some of your study materials, and you download this worksheet, and then you give your peer review of the essay, and you give any comments or suggestions to your classmate. And then you're going to use this forum here, and you're going to then put your paper here. Make sure whomever you know, for example, Jaleesa, when you get your draft done, then you're going to put your paper here. You're going to come and download it. And then the next person that comes on, they will review your paper, and then so on. So whomever places their paper on, then you just follow suit, and you do the review of the other classmate. All right, so it's a little tricky. So this is your first point. And then let me go out of this area. Hopefully it's going to work for me. So these are the 3 areas. I think I have this screenshot. I hope it comes up okay. So on your, whoops. So on where you're going to post your assignments, you know, where you post all of your assignments, there are 3 areas where you have to post. Your final paper will be your benchmark paper, and that's where you will download it. And then you have the area of your draft that you have to submit here, and then your worksheet that you have to work here to log here. So I'm here if you have any other questions, but I think if you read through it clearly, make sure that you download your draft, and then you have to also download or upload your worksheet for your peer review. So, and then finally, after you complete your revisions from the peer review, then you come back and you submit your final draft. I think that it's probably due in about 2 weeks, your final draft. So it is a process.
I have a question.
Yes.
So since it's a rough draft, does it have to meet the word count, or is that word count just for the final draft?
It should be pretty close. I'm really not one to, you know, if someone's giving the peer review, they need to make sure that they're understanding it clearly, you know. So you want to get it pretty close to final. It doesn't have to be the actual word count, but you should have your main ideas there, because when the individual reviews your paper, you know, it'll be based on the information that you've provided. So to answer your question, it does not have to meet the word count, but it should be clear enough that, you know, the person that you're doing the peer review, they can understand it clearly. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense. Okay, very good. Yeah, so it's just your rough draft, but I think if you try to follow that, the outline that I gave you, that just gives you a perspective to make sure that's the information that you are including, you know, whatever based on your topic. I had one of my students ask if they could, you know, there's different types of culture. I mean, you know, like there's, they wanted to do culture. You know, like there's a fashion culture, right? For example, there is that fashion culture. Can I, you know, write my paper on the fashion culture? Absolutely, but you have to make sure you are clear in identifying the information having to do with that culture. Like, what are the patterns? What are the values? You know, what is the architectural influence, right? So it's sometimes easier to do a cultural review having to do with, you know, someone's, you know, the country, you know, because it's going to give you a little bit more specific information is already provided. Any other questions? No more questions?
Do we need a intro and conclusion paragraphs with like a thesis and everything?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I put that specifically on the outline. Yeah, that's what I will be grading you on. You know, those are the things that I will be looking for. You have to have a clear thesis. You have to have, you know, your thesis, your introduction, and then you're going to go into, you know, outlining specifically what your cultural intent, you know, that you'll be reviewing. You're going to talk about, you know, a few of those elements having to do with either you're going to discuss their pastimes or their architect. What I'm looking for is that you understand the textual information about this topic. Okay, so even if you're using, you know, if you're using America as the American culture, I don't want you to tell me a lot about the American culture. I want you to identify those terms, you know, about their values and about their structure, and you know, so that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for those. I'm looking for the symbols and the values and the norms. Okay, any more questions?
Right, thank you. Have a nice one.
You too. I see that there's some chat information that I didn't go through. I see there's some other people here. Anyone else have some questions before I get out? Okay. Jaleesa, can you please go over the essay? Layout. Okay, good to go. All right. All right. So looks like I did look at this. Okay, so I see a few other individuals that are here. So do you have any questions? Did you want to go over anything else? Jaleesa,
No.
Anna?
Thank you, though. I just wanted to say bye.
Oh, thank you for saying bye. Okay, I'll see you Tuesday.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good one, Anna.
You too.
Jaleesa, you're there?
Okay, so I'm really bad at writing essays, so that's why I have to like know exactly. So say so basically the paper we're picking a country and we're like basically writing about the country, writing about it, right?
Let me, if you will, let me go to where, let me see where, if I can find it quickly so I can just walk you through it. Just a second. Oh, I can't minimize that. All right. Hold on. You know what? Can we do this? Can we go off Zoom a moment and then you come right back on?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.